Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you felt, I don't know, a quiet nudge? That subtle feeling you were being steered in a direction you wouldn't typically go?
Or maybe like someone was pulling your strings, but you couldn't quite put your finger on it?
Exactly. The world of human interaction is incredibly complex. And, well, beneath the surface of everyday communication lies this fascinating, sometimes unsettling realm often called dark psychology.
Indeed. And while that term might sound a bit ominous, our deep dive today isn't about teaching you how to use these forces. Not at all.
No, definitely not.
Instead, we're unearthing the surprising truths about manipulation and persuasion. The goal is so you can understand their mechanics, recognize them when you see them, and ultimately protect your own mind, protect your free will.
Think of this as your essential guide, maybe a shortcut, to navigating the hidden influences that are all around us.
And fueling our exploration today is a really comprehensive collection of insights. It's from Dark Psychology's Secrets and Manipulation.
Right. A single but very dense source. It gives us a huge wealth of information. Everything from, the subtle art of emotional manipulation right through to powerful persuasion tactics.
And crucially, incredibly practical strategies for self-protection. That's key.
So by the end of this deep dive, you should walk away with a much better awareness of how messages get crafted, how emotions are leveraged.
And how you can confidently navigate social interactions, knowing when your boundaries might be getting tested.
This isn't just abstract theory, is it?
Not at all. It's about giving you tangible tools, things you can actually use to feel more grounded, more empowered in your daily life.
Okay, let's dive right in then. Let's start with the core of manipulation. What's the fundamental objective? What's a manipulator actually trying to achieve?
Well, at its heart, a manipulator's goal is to subtly align your wants and desires with their own objectives.
Okay, aligning desires.
And what's truly fascinating and maybe a bit unsettling is that the closer someone is to you, the easier it often becomes for them to manipulate.
Really? That seems counterintuitive. You'd think strangers.
You would, wouldn't you? But it challenges that common assumption. The real danger often lies in that slow erosion of trust within our closest relationships.
Because you let your guard down more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's harder to spot because we inherently trust those we're vulnerable with. We're not talking about big, dramatic shifts usually. It's more about tiny, almost imperceptible nudges that just accumulate over time.
So it's less like a sudden attack and more like a calculated, maybe even long-term strategy.
Precisely.
And a very common form of this involves our emotions, right? Emotional manipulation.
Absolutely. Emotional and psychological manipulation really thrives on an uneven power dynamic. One individual preys on the weaknesses of another.
And it creates this disturbing cycle, the source says.
Yes, a repetitive cycle.
Yeah.
The manipulator identifies a vulnerability, exploits it, then repeats the process. Find weakness, exploit weakness, repeat.
And once they find something that works,
They're highly unlikely to stop, not until they're forced to. It's a pattern driven entirely by their own needs, not yours.
speaking of the kinds of people who do this, there's a significant piece of research you mentioned earlier from Paulus and Williams back in 2002. It introduced the dark triad.
Ah, yes, the dark triad. It's easy to picture villains when we hear that term, right?
Definitely. Like movie characters.
But what's really unsettling, and what the research highlights, is how these traits exist on a spectrum. A spectrum that touches all of us, really, influencing everyday interactions in subtle ways you might not expect.
So what are the three traits?
Okay, the triad consists of narcissism, which is characterized by that entitled self-importance, a real grandiosity. Then there's Machiavellianism. That's the manipulation of others purely for self-gain, very strategic, very cunning.
Right.
And finally, psychopathy, which describes an individual lacking empathy or remorse. They often have impulsive behavior too.
And the key point is the spectrum idea.
Exactly. The researchers even suggest, and this is quote, we all are at least a little bit narcissistic, a little bit Machiavellian, and a little bit psychopathic.
Wow, so it's not about labeling people as monsters.
No, it's about recognizing where you, or perhaps others you interact with, might fall on that spectrum. It helps understand tendencies, not just identify extreme cases.
That makes sense. Are there other dark traits mentioned that factor into this kind of behavior?
Yes, the source briefly touches on a couple more. There's sadism, which is finding gratification or dominance through inflicting suffering on others.
Okay.
And spitefulness, where an individual might inflict harm, even if it means hurting themselves in the process.
So again, highlighting these varied, often self-serving, harmful behaviors.
Precisely. They all feed into this darker side of human interaction.
Okay, now that we've kind of laid the groundwork on the what and the who, let's turn to the how. How do manipulators actually operate? What are some of their basic tools?
Well, the source outlines several core deceptive tools in their arsenal. First, there's simple deceit,
Meaning?
deliberately withholding vital information or just actively misleading someone with words or actions, twisting things.
Okay. What else?
Then there's guilt. Oh, guilt is a powerful one, making you feel responsible for outcomes that really aren't your fault at all.
The guilt trip. A classic.
Absolutely. And of course, outright lies.
Hmm.
Just twisting the truth, spreading falsehoods. That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
And finally, there's false hope, making these empty promises that they probably have no intention of keeping. It just keeps you dependent or compliant, waiting for something that might never happen.
Those seem pretty overt. What about the subtler psychological plays? The things that aren't outright lies but still feel off?
Ah, yes. A prime example is what the source calls demeaning sarcasm.
Sarcasm as a weapon.
Exactly. Manipulators will use what looks like a joke to bring up your struggles, maybe a failed exam, a difficult relationship, but it's done in this really underhanded way.
So the goal isn't humor.
No, not at all. The goal is to create insecurity, to subtly overpower you, especially maybe when you're getting positive attention from others. It's designed to make people doubt your worth or competence. It just chips away at your confidence.
That's really insidious. And then there's the exploitation of emotional investments. How does that work?
Right. The source points out that manipulators actively target individuals who seem emotionally possessed or threatened.
Meaning vulnerable people.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
People who are already feeling insecure or invested. The warning here is pretty clear. Be very careful about verbally expressing your deepest emotional investments or showing your weaknesses to people you don't fully trust.
Because they might use it against you.
Precisely. Some individuals will absolutely try to benefit from that vulnerability. So it's wise to reserve that level of openness for a very select, trusted few.
Okay, good advice. What about crazy-making behaviors? That sounds particularly damaging.
Oh, it is. These tactics are deliberately aimed at making victims doubt their own sanity, their own perception of reality.
How? What does that look like?
Well, a manipulator might offer verbal support, say all the right things, but their nonverbal cues, their body language, completely contradict it. Saying one thing, signaling another.
Curating confusion.
Massive confusion. And then if you confront them about their behavior...
They deny it.
Exactly. They'll often resort to rationalization, justification, denial. They might say things like, that never happened, or you're imagining things, or you're being too sensitive. It's all designed to escape accountability and make you question your own memory and judgment.
It sounds like these manipulators share a very particular kind of mindset.
They really do. A core element is having little to no regard for their victims' feelings. It just doesn't register, or they don't care.
Driven by something else.
Yes, usually by a deep, often quite insecure need for control. They mask this insecurity with a domineering, confident appearance. The source says they simply do not feel any pity, guilt, or shame for their actions or how their behavior affects others.
Wow. That need to control and feel superior just trumps everything else.
It really seems to.
That leads us towards the extreme end of manipulation. Brainwashing. How does our source describe that? It sounds like something out of a spy movie.
It can feel that way, but it's a real psychological process. The source describes brainwashing as a systematic effort aimed at dismantling a person's self-identity.
Breaking them down?
Yes. Weakening their core beliefs, their attitudes, their values, even their basic thought processes. It often involves the pervasive use of fear and threats to create extreme dependence.
How? Like what kind of threats?
Things like withholding vital resources, money, food, shelter, or maybe forbidding interaction with friends and family.
Yeah.
Isolating the person completely.
So the victim becomes totally reliant.
Utterly reliant. They essentially become imprisoned in their own lives, constantly thinking about how to please their abuser, even if there's no physical abuse happening. The psychological control is immense.
Fascinating and, frankly, terrifying to think about that level of control. It's striking, though, how manipulation so often seems to bleed into what we normally just call persuasion.
That's an excellent point. There's definitely overlap.
So where do you see the key distinctions, or maybe the most dangerous overlaps between the two?
Well, persuasion, at its core, is simply the transfer of a message designed to alter someone's feelings or thinking. It can be subtle, it can be direct, and its roots are as old as human communication itself.
Like you said, lawyers, religious figures.
Right. Anyone trying to convince an individual or group to accept a certain belief or concept is using persuasion. The key distinction from manipulation should lie in transparency and intent. Is the goal mutual understanding, or is it purely self-serving control, often hidden?
And the ancient Greeks were thinking about this. Aristotle famously broke down persuasion into three forms, didn't he?
He did brilliantly. First, there's ethos.
Yeah.
That's persuasion based on ethics and credibility.
So being trustworthy.
Exactly. Trustworthiness, expertise, citing relevant sources, having good moral standing. It's meant to be a respectful and honest form of influence. You trust the speaker, so you trust the message.
Okay, ethos. What's next?
Then there's logos. This relies purely on logic and reason.
Facts and figures.
Precisely. Using evidence, studies, data, a clear, concise presentation of facts to build a logical case, appealing to the rational mind.
Makes sense. And the third one, pathos. I understand this is often considered the most powerful.
Absolutely. Pathos appeals directly to the audience's emotions, their passions, imaginations, sympathy, fears. It's undeniably the most powerful and, yes, the most frequently used method.
But that's where the danger lies, right? Where it can cross into manipulation.
Exactly. Here's where the line can really blur. Ethical persuasion often uses pathos to connect emotionally, maybe to make a logical argument land better, to make it resonate.
Okay.
But manipulative tactics often use pathos alone, or disproportionately, to override logic entirely. The telltale sign is when someone tries to make you feel intensely guilty or fearful or obligated without providing a clear, rational basis for their request or argument.
So they're bypassing your thinking brain.
Right. It's about recognizing when emotion is being used to bypass your critical thinking, rather than enhance understanding or connection. That's a crucial distinction for self-protection.
Absolutely crucial. Let's explore some other key persuasion techniques the source mentions. Some of these are probably used ethically sometimes and manipulatively others, like a simple smile.
It truly can be incredibly powerful. A genuine smile builds rapport almost instantly. It increases the likelihood of getting someone to go along with you, to agree with you.
But the key is genuine.
That's the key word, yes.
Mm.
A forced or fake smile is usually pretty easy to spot, and it can actually backfire, creating distrust. It's about sincerity, making natural eye contact, signaling openness and warmth.
Okay. And compliments. I've definitely seen those work wonders.
Oh, compliments are fascinating. At their core, they're about validation. When you accept a compliment, say, someone tells you you're very kind for go, you're subtly accepting their judgment of you.
Right. You agree with their assessment.
And that acceptance can then be leveraged. For instance, that same person might follow up with, since you're such a kind person, you wouldn't mind doing this little favor for me, would you?
Ah. So it creates an internal pressure to conform to the label.
Exactly. Pressure to live up to the label they've just given you, even if the request isn't something you'd normally agree to.
Sneaky. Okay. The appeal to emotion seems like a really broad category, but it feels central to both persuasion and manipulation.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
The source describes it as the strategy of intentionally using emotions to keep someone off balance to achieve your goals.
Off balance. How so?
Think about a lawyer in court trying to rattle a witness, make them angry or flustered so they slip up, or salesperson building up excitement or maybe fear of missing out to close a deal quickly. Winning or losing these games of influence often comes down to managing emotions, yours and theirs, sometimes more than the actual facts.
Empathy also makes the list in the source, which might surprise some people. We usually think of empathy as purely good.
And it is essential for genuine connection, absolutely. But like many things, it can be twisted. Manipulators can feign empathy.
Ah, performative empathy.
Exactly. They use it strategically to build rapport, make people feel safe and secure, feel understood. And once you feel that connection, you're naturally more inclined towards compliance.
So that friendly salesperson showing empathy
Might achieve higher sales, not because they genuinely care about your problem, but because they've skillfully created a manufactured sense of trust and understanding that encourages you to buy.
Right. Okay, then there's assuming the sale. I think I've experienced this one.
Oh, it's a classic sales tactic. Super common. Instead of asking if you want to buy, the salesperson just jumps ahead and asks for details as if the purchase is already agreed upon.
Like, will that be cash or card? Before I've even said yes.
Exactly. Or would you like that in red or blue? Or where should we deliver it? It effectively tries to take away the buyer's choice, creating this momentum and expectation of agreement.
And curiosity, how is that a persuasion technique?
Well, skilled influencers use what look like simple questions, just showing interest. But it's actually strategic information gathering.
Finding out your needs or weaknesses.
Precisely. When it comes to influence, as the saying goes, information is king. The more they know about your needs, your desires, your fears, your hot buttons, the more effectively they can tailor their pitch to bypass your rational mind and appeal directly to your emotions.
Okay. And what about the foot in the door technique? That sounds familiar too.
It's another classic. It involves starting with a very small, easy-to-grant request or favor, something most people would say yes to without much thought.
Like signing a petition.
Perfect example.
Right.
Or maybe asking for a tiny donation. Then, once you've agreed to that small thing, they follow up later with a much larger request.
And you're more likely to say yes to the big one?
Psychologically, yes. Because you've already established a pattern of compliance, you see yourself as the kind of person who helps or agrees with this cause or person. It makes it harder to say no the second time.
Counter-attitudinal advocacy. That's quite a mouthful. What on earth does that mean?
Yeah, it sounds academic, but the concept is powerful. It refers to a situation where people state views or opinions they don't actually believe, maybe publicly,
Why would they do that?
often due to group pressure or circumstance. But here's the interesting part. Over time, to reduce the internal discomfort, the cognitive dissonance of saying one thing and believing another, they often start to shift their actual beliefs to align with what they've been saying.
Wow. So saying becomes believing.
In some cases, yes. The source mentions this is a powerful technique seen in groups like cults or gangs, where individuals publicly advocate for the group's beliefs, and then, to justify their own behavior and reduce that inner conflict, they start to internalize those beliefs.
That's quite profound. Okay, visual imagery and compelling stories. That one feels more intuitive. We remember stories.
Absolutely. It just makes sense,
Yeah.
right? Using vivid visual language, telling engaging stories, it brings points to life. It makes ideas far more memorable and persuasive than just dry facts or abstract arguments because it directly engages our imagination and our emotions.
And first impressions. Still as important as ever.
Oh, absolutely crucial, according to the source. People often make snap judgments and decide whether they're going to listen to you, whether they trust you, within the first few seconds of an encounter.
So posture, handshake.
All of it. Adopting a strong posture, offering a genuine smile, a firm handshake, making good eye contact, and having an engaging opening statement, these are all vital for making a positive initial impact. It really sets the stage for everything that follows.
Okay, now this one's intriguing. Subliminal messages. Are these really a thing? Are advertisers flashing hidden messages at us?
Well, the whole drink Coke and eat popcorn flashing in movie theaters back in the 50s, that's famously controversial and likely exaggerated or even fabricated. The science on truly subliminal messages having a direct, powerful impact is still debated.
So it's not like mind control.
No, probably not in that dramatic sense. However, more subtle forms of priming and suggestion are definitely at play in modern marketing and communication. It might not be hidden words slashed too fast to see consciously.
But more like,
More like quick visual cues in an ad, the specific type of music used. Things designed to intrigue our unconscious defense mechanisms, maybe nudge us towards a desired action or shift our perception slightly. For instance, the imagery used in advertising can subtly impact your self-esteem, perhaps making you feel that buying a product will fill some kind of gap or make you happier.
so it's more about subtle association and priming than hidden commands?
That seems to be a more accurate picture,
And then
yes.
finally, the very structure of language itself, and even what we don't say nonverbal cues, can be incredibly powerful tools.
Couldn't agree more. And the source emphasizes this heavily, using hot words. Words that provoke specific feelings or sensations, or conversely, using intentionally vague language can effectively direct a listener's state of mind.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. And there's also a technique the source calls the intersperse technique. This is where a seemingly positive statement carries a hidden, negative subtext, often delivered with a specific emphasis. Like saying, John is a very generous person, B-U-T. Some people take advantage of him and treat him as though he is gullible. The emphasis on but and the slightly louder or differently toned gullible can subtly implant that negative idea, even though the main clause was positive.
Wow, that's subtle manipulation right there.
It is. And crucially, remember what the source states. Over 95% of communication is nonverbal.
95%.
It's a huge number. Our actions, our facial expressions, our tone of voice, our posture, they often betray our words if there's a mismatch, or they significantly amplify them if they're congruent. Nonverbal cues are incredibly powerful.
Speaking of the subtle workings of the mind, our source brings up a really fascinating framework called neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP, and anchoring. What are these all about?
Right, NLP. It's described as a pragmatic school of thought. The core idea is modeling successful people, understanding how they achieve success in communication or other areas so you can replicate their effective behaviors and thought patterns.
So it's like reverse engineering success.
In a way, yes. It combines insights from language, linguistic, how our brain processes information, neuro, and how we organize our thoughts and actions, programming, to understand how we perceive the world. Essentially, NLP offers tools to help individuals reprogram their thoughts and ideas to achieve more desirable outcomes.
Okay, so if I understand what successful people do, I can effectively copy their process or at least learn from it. What's anchoring in this NLP context?
Anchoring is a key NLP technique. It's all about forming a strong association between some kind of external stimulus, a touch, a sound, a visual cue, and a specific internal state or emotion.
Like Pavlov's dogs, the bell and salivating.
Exactly like Pavlov's dogs. That's a classic example of an anchor. Or think about how the specific sound of your morning alarm clock instantly triggers maybe a feeling of dread or urgency. That sound is anchored to that feeling.
Okay, I get it.
Now, the cool thing NLP suggests is that you can proactively create these anchors. You can trigger this anchor voluntarily to access positive emotions like confidence or calmness whenever you need them.
How do you do that? How do you create an anchor?
The source mentions the I turn keys as being crucial. That stands for intensity of the experience and timing.
Intensity and timing.
Right. You need to capture the desired emotional state when it's really intense, at its peak. And the timing is critical. You apply the anchor, say pressing your thumb and finger together, at the very peak of that strong emotional state.
So if I feel really confident after a success, I'd make a specific gesture right at that peak moment.
Exactly. You do that consistently. Then later, making that same gesture can help recall and bring back that feeling of confidence. It's a way to access your own internal resources on demand.
That's a really powerful tool for self-management. And NLP isn't just for personal development, right? The source says it has broader benefits, too.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's widely applied in various professional fields. NLP techniques can significantly improve negotiation skills, for instance. They can help boost team morale by improving communication and understanding within the team. It's also considered an excellent customer service tool because it enhances the ability to really listen, understand customer complaints, read nonverbal cues, and build rapport quickly.
So it makes interactions more effective across the board?
Pretty much. From teamwork and coaching to sales, leadership, therapy. Its principles can be applied in many areas where effective communication and understanding human behavior are key.
Okay, so now that we know all these different tactics, both manipulative and persuasive, who actually employs them in the real world? Where do we see this stuff happening?
Well, the list the source provides is, perhaps unsurprisingly, quite extensive. Salespeople are prime example, of course.
The classic used car salesman stereotype comes to mind.
Right, that stereotype exists for a reason, but it goes far beyond that, into modern advertising as well. Ads often prey on our basic human emotional instincts, as the source puts it. They show users of products as being incredibly happy, subtly creating that association. Use this product, feel this happy.
Linking consumption to happiness.
Exactly. It taps into those pathos appeals we talked about.
It's actually quite chilling when you start to think about how many of the ads we see daily might be using these very instincts against us without us even realizing it.
It does make you look at advertising differently.
And politicians and public speakers, I imagine they're masters of this.
Oh, absolutely. Skilled politicians and speakers are often adept at reading audience cues, presenting themselves with unwavering confidence, even if, maybe, they're a bit clueless about the actual details sometimes.
Projecting certainty.
Right. They might intimidate competitors, and they definitely appeal to emotional states within the audience. They often achieve this through intentionally ambiguous words that mean different things to different people, or by directly citing fears to motivate people.
Using fear as a tool.
It's a very common tactic in political rhetoric. They'll often do whatever it takes, ethically or not, to sway opinions and gain support.
And our source gives some truly infamous historical and psychological examples where these techniques were used with devastating effect. People like Charles Manson, Adolf Hitler, Ted Bundy.
Yes, these are extreme, dark examples, but they illustrate the power involved. Charles Manson notoriously used his words, his charisma, and his twisted sense of love for his so-called family to turn young, often vulnerable adults into murderers without ever directly killing anyone himself. Pure psychological manipulation.
And Hitler.
Adolf Hitler began his rise by gaining popularity through masterful persuasion, tapping into national sentiment, using powerful oratory. But then he deployed horrific manipulative techniques on a mass scale to convince people that entire groups of human beings were worthless, less than human, leading to unimaginable atrocities.
And Ted Bundy, the serial killer, how does he fit?
Bundy is a chilling example because he famously used his charisma, his conventional good looks, and this crafted best friend or helpful stranger persona to lure his victims into trusting him. It showcases how even deeply disturbed individuals can wield immense persuasive or rather deceptive power to achieve horrific ends.
And it wasn't just individuals. In psychology, the Stanford prison experiment back in the 1970s really brought home how situations can manipulate behavior, didn't it?
It really did. Philip Zimbardo's experiment, while ethically controversial now, powerfully demonstrated how readily ordinary people will conform to social roles, especially in a heavily manipulated environment.
Just college students assigned roles.
Exactly. College students assigned roles as guards and prisoners quickly and disturbingly adopted those roles. The guards became authoritarian, even abusive, and the prisoners became passive and distressed. It illustrated how easily individuals can be controlled and influenced by situational pressures and manipulative setups, often without fully realizing the extent of the influence or the harm they might be causing.
Okay, so with all of this in mind, the tactics, the traits, the real-world examples, the big question becomes, how do we protect our minds from this? What are the key strategies for self-defense that the source offers?
This is really the crucial takeaway. One foundational strategy mentioned is cultivating inner peace.
Inner peace, like meditation.
Exactly. Meditation or other mindfulness practices can help quiet the constant chatter in the mind. This makes it far easier to remain calm and aware when you're facing emotional or psychological manipulation.
So you can see it more clearly.
Yes. An individual with that sense of inner peace can often stay centered and recognize a manipulator's intentions, even when things around them feel hostile or disorienting or confusing.
That makes sense. Establishing clear boundaries seems incredibly critical here, too.
Oh, vitally important. The source really stresses this. It's essential to consciously create and then firmly follow your own personal boundaries. You need to actively disregard the manipulator's attempts to push or violate them.
And manipulators often have weird boundary issues themselves, right?
Yes, they often try to set overly strict or involved boundaries for others while ignoring normal boundaries themselves. So, asserting your own boundaries is a direct and powerful countermove. It reclaims your space.
Okay. What about avoiding emotional attachment? The source mentions this but acknowledges it can be tough, especially if the manipulator is showing false signs of kindness at the beginning.
It is incredibly challenging, no doubt, especially because manipulation often starts subtly, maybe even charmingly. But the advice is often about necessity. The best approach, if possible, is to pay close attention to those very early beginning signs of emotional manipulation.
Red flags.
Exactly. Little inconsistencies, maybe attempts to control, excessive jealousy disguised as care. If you spot those red flags early on, the advice is to slowly and deliberately start backing out of the relationship before deep emotional attachment forms.
Easier said than done, I imagine.
Much easier said than done. But it's significantly harder to disentangle yourself once you're deeply invested emotionally. Early awareness is key.
And what if you're already in it? How do you deny a manipulator power once they're already trying to get into your head?
The source offers a few tactics here. Things like responding to insults or demeaning comments with a calm laugh, rather than anger or defensiveness.
Just brush it off.
Essentially, yes. Or maybe going along with what they say without actually agreeing internally, just nodding or giving non-committal responses. The point is to deny them the emotional reaction or the struggle they're looking for.
Because they feed on that reaction.
Often, yes. That reaction gives them a sense of control. If you don't give it to them, you prevent them from getting into one's head, as the source puts it. It effectively disarms that particular tactic.
Prioritizing self-worth sounds like another fundamental defense, almost like building an emotional shield from the inside out.
That's a great way to put it. Absolutely. When you focus on developing and maintaining your own idea of self, your own internal sense of value, rather than relying constantly on external validation from others.
What they think of you.
Right. When your self-worth is solid and comes from within, it makes it nearly impossible for others to weaken that self-assurance. Manipulators lose their primary leverage, which is often trying to chip away at your confidence and make you doubt yourself.
So build your own foundation strong.
Precisely.
And strategic decision-making, basically, don't let them rush you into things.
Exactly. The advice is clear. Avoid making rash decisions. especially significant ones like signing contracts, making major commitments, or changing jobs without taking the time to think them over independently.
Step back, get perspective.
Yes, give yourself space to reach a rational conclusion based on your own needs, your own values, your own research, rather than being swayed by a manipulator's pressure, urgency, or desires. Don't let them control the timeline.
Okay. There's also this interesting idea in the source about rewiring for resilience or even acting the part sometimes. What's that about?
Yeah, that's quite interesting. The source mentions studies suggesting that resilience, the ability to bounce back, to adapt rather than outright aggression, is what truly improves social dominance or effectiveness in a healthy way.
So being strong, but flexible.
Kind of. And it suggests that translating success from one area of your life, maybe work or a hobby, to other areas, significantly builds this overall resilience. And then there's the acting the part idea.
Like fake it till you make it.
A bit like that, but strategically. For instance, if you know you're naturally introverted, but you're in a specific social or professional situation where projecting confidence would be beneficial, you might consciously choose to act the part of a confident extrovert.
Just for that situation.
Right. The idea is that practicing those behaviors, holding confident posture, speaking clearly, making eye contact, even if it feels unnatural at first, can actually help rewire your brain over time through neuroplasticity. It can build genuine social strength and comfort in those situations.
It's interesting. And controlling the flow of information, playing their hiding game, but better.
Yes, this is presented as central to self-protection, especially against Machiavellian types. Manipulators thrive on knowing your vulnerabilities, your triggers, what's important to you, because that's what they exploit.
So don't give them the ammunition.
Exactly. The advice is to learn to control what you reveal. The less they know about what's truly emotionally important to you, the less leverage they have. You might consider strategically misleading them if necessary, or simply remaining emotionally invisible on key topics. Don't wear your heart on your sleeve with untrustworthy people.
It sounds like emotional intelligence and self-awareness are just paramount through all of this.
Absolutely critical. Understanding your own emotions, what you're feeling, and why managing them effectively, so you're not just reacting blindly. And crucially, learning to trust your intuition, your gut feelings. These are key.
Intuition as an early warning system.
Very much so. And also, recognizing appropriate versus inappropriate emotional responses. For instance, feeling anger when your boundaries are clearly being overstepped isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's a signal. Recognizing that empowers you to react intentionally, maybe assertively, rather than just being swept away by the emotion or feeling guilty for having it.
What if you're in a deeper, more established manipulative relationship? Is there advice on confrontation? That sounds risky.
It can be risky, and the source acknowledges that. For these deeper, more entrenched manipulative relationships, it suggests considering a calm, clear confrontation.
How'd that look?
Not aggressive, but assertive. Clearly stating your boundaries and your feelings about the manipulative behavior. For example, saying something like, I understand you see it differently, but I feel undermined when you speak to me that way, and I won't allow you to play on my fears any longer.
Direct and boundary setting.
Yes.
Yeah.
The source suggests this might actually lead to the manipulator backing off, or perhaps even leaving the relationship, because they often thrive on easy targets who don't push back effectively.
But it also might escalate things.
It could, which is why, if the situation feels severe, potentially abusive, or you feel unsafe, seeking professional help from a therapist or counselor is highly recommended. Confrontation isn't always the right or safest step.
Right. Safety first. Okay. And finally, the source lists some really powerful personal resilience habits. Can we recap those quickly?
Definitely. These are great practical tips. First, stick to your beliefs, especially your core, innocent, non-harmful beliefs. Don't let others easily sway you from your values.
Okay.
Second, try not to take things personally. Realize that often other people's negative actions or comments are more about their issues, their insecurities, their own stuff, than they are actually about you.
Detach a bit.
Exactly. Third, practice self-compassion. Avoid endlessly overanalyzing your own perceived flaws or criticizing yourself harshly. Be kind to yourself.
Important.
Fourth, be fearless, or at least act fearless. Consciously face things that scare you in small steps. This builds real confidence over time, like the just do it mentality, applied carefully.
Push your comfort zone.
Right. And fifth, and this ties back to inner peace, stay in the present moment as much as possible. Practices like mindfulness and meditation can help avoid getting lost in worrying about the past or feeling anxious about the future. Stay grounded now.
Those are really solid habits for general well-being, not just manipulation defense.
Absolutely. They build overall mental and emotional strength.
Our exploration also briefly touched on scarcity and value creation. How does that fit in perhaps as an ethical tool or even a defense?
Right. The principle of scarcity is powerful in persuasion. When something is perceived as being limited in terms of time, color, options, availability, and quantity, our desire for it naturally increases. We see this in marketing all the time. Limited time offer.
Fear of missing out, FOMO.
Exactly. FOMO is driven by scarcity.
Okay.
Now, the source suggests you can apply this principle ethically in your own life or work. First, clearly demonstrate the inherent value of what you offer, your skills, your service, your product. Then, you can ethically induce a sense of scarcity by being clear about realistic limitations. Maybe your time is limited. Maybe a product is a special edition. It's not about deception, but about letting your audience know they might genuinely miss out if they don't act. It frames your offering as uniquely valuable and not endlessly available.
So value plus realistic limitation.
That's the ethical application, yes.
Okay. So we've really navigated a complex landscape today. We've gone through the subtle mechanics of manipulation, the persuasive arts, both ethical and unethical.
And most importantly, the critical tools and strategies for self-protection. Hopefully, you feel like you've been armed with knowledge to better discern these hidden influences.
And to stand firm in your own autonomy, your own choices.
Absolutely. Remember, this whole deep dive wasn't about teaching you how to manipulate others. Not at all.
No, the goal was empowerment.
Exactly. To empower you to recognize manipulative behavior in all its forms, whether it's a subtle sales pitch, a dynamic in a personal relationship, or even political rhetoric, and to safeguard your own free will, as the source puts it.
It really feels like the ultimate power lies not in trying to control other people,
But in mastering your own mind,
yeah,
understanding yourself, recognizing these subtle dances of influence that are happening all around us all the time.
So the final thought to leave you with, now that you have this new awareness, what previously unnoticed cues or patterns might you start observing in your daily interactions? What new understanding will this bring to your relationships, your decisions, how you navigate the world?
What will you do with this new awareness? That's the real question.